All right, so I am doing my presentation on treating anxiety with psilocybin. So I thought I would give a really quick kind of background on what microdosing is. This was mostly for me in my research to get a sense of it in regards to psilocybin. So the general consensus about the definition of microdosing that I got is that there really isn't one definition. However, I thought that this definition summed it up pretty good. Psilocybin microdosing involves repeated self-administration of mushrooms containing psilocybin at doses small enough to not impact regular functioning. Microdose practices are diverse and include combining psilocybin with substances such as lion's mane, mushrooms, which is actually called Hericium erinaceus, and niacin, which is vitamin B3. This is lion's mane, which grows on the side of dead tree trunks. And I also learned that combining microdosing substance with something else is called stacking. So aside from lion's mane, other common things are chocolate or niacin, like I already said. What does psilocybin do to the brain? Psilocybin, also known informally as magic mushrooms, is a hallucinogenic drug. When taken in regular doses as opposed to micro doses, you can expect to feel euphoric and you may hallucinate. Similarly to LSD, psilocybin wakes up serotonin receptors on brain cells and affects the area of the brain that processes emotions, the prefrontal cortex. Furthermore, psilocybin has been known to reduce neural activity in several areas of the brain. It also happens that this area of the brain is responsible for regulating anxiety. This was explained in an article by Margot Kenwood, Ned Collin, and Helen Barbas about anxiety disorders and the prefrontal cortex in specific. They said that in primates, anxiety can be regulated by the prefrontal cortex, which has expanded in evolution. This prefrontal expansion is thought to underlie primates' increased capacity to engage high-level regulatory strategies aimed at coping with and modifying the experience of anxiety. So right off the bat, it's easy to see that the treatment is definitely related to the problem in that both anxiety and psilocybin activate in the same part of the brain. You can see all these little dopamine pathways and serotonin pathways crossing the prefrontal cortex. All right, so next I looked at a study on adults. In this study done on psychedelics in 2021, 4,541 adults completed a DAS-21 assessment, which is a 21-question medical assessment that stands for Depression, Anxiety, Stress Scale. About half of the people are microdosers and the other half are non-microdosers. 29% of these people reported mental health-related issues of all kinds, and the most commonly reported one was anxiety. Across all three categories of anxiety, depression, and stress, non-microdosers experience the symptoms of those mental health problems worse than microdosers. This study included LSD microdosers in the participant pool, so the information isn't subject to only psilocybin, but you can see, like, right off the bat, the non-microdosers' symptoms were just worse in all categories. And then I thought that I would share, there are some interesting facts that I read in this article too, that microdosers are more likely to be older and to live in an urban area rather than a suburban area. And that microdosers were also less likely to use alcohol frequently and were more likely to abstain from alcohol entirely. Microdosers were also more likely to abstain from tobacco and more likely to use cannabis more frequently. So I thought that was also really interesting. All right, let's look at a contrasting study. So in this study, which was also performed in 2021, the aim was also to conclude whether or not microdosing psychedelics affects emotional processing or reduces symptoms of anxiety, depression. However, this research was designed specifically around psilocybin. 75 applicants were chosen to participate in this study. It's important to note that this was also placebo-controlled. A member of the Psychedelic Society of the Netherlands that was supervising the study administered little bags of mushrooms at random to participants, including their psilocybin doses. However, half the bags contained non-active placebo doses. The participants were given clear instructions to self-administer their first bag of doses across a 3-week period. They were then asked to take a 2-week break before doing the same 3-week trial with their second bag of doses. In addition to completing the DAS-21 assessment as a baseline initially, they had to complete it again after their 7th dose. Participants also had to take an emotional go or no-go task an hour and a half after their 7th dose or placebo dose, which is basically an assessment where they flash photos on the screen of a person's face, and they're like shown beforehand before the assessment begins, like what the neutral is. And it's basically like a person's face with a bunch of different emotions. So either smiling really hard or someone who looks really scared. And then there's the neutral face. And it was basically just measuring their response time and accuracy, obviously, across the people who were on a microdose of psilocybin and the people who were just on the placebo dose of psilocybin. Lastly, they also had to complete the MAIA, which is a 32-question assessment used to measure interoceptive body awareness. In my opinion, what I can gather from this particular study is that symptoms of anxiety were reduced for participants that administered psilocybin. However, they weren't significantly, as technically the participants that administered placebo doses also had a reduction in anxiety symptoms. So the placebo kind of almost matched up. You can see with anxiety, it's probably the most significant though. When looking at depression, it was honestly pretty similar. And that's what I found in the other study as well, is that depression has a lesser effect from psilocybin than anxiety has so far, is what I've gathered. So the people who administered the real doses seem to have had a slightly more significant reduction, though. Many participants under the actual psilocybin dose reported their feelings as well, which mainly consisted of increased energy, euphoria, physical buzz feeling, clear-mindedness, happier mood, but also dizziness and nausea. A few people under the placebo dose reported similar feelings, but there were much less reports, which you can see here. Like, there was only 2 reports of calmness from people under the placebo effect. And I feel like there's just a lot more in this column over here, reported feelings of people under the psilocybin than on this side here. The second round of doses had the same outcome. Participants under the actual dose reported all those same feelings again the second time around that they did the 3-week trial, while there were only 2 participants that second time that reported any feelings at all under the placebo effect. The most popular feeling reported was a positive mood and feelings of happiness. While this does not directly correlate oppositely of anxiety, it sure does point in the right direction, I think. The results in this study concluded that microdosing psilocybin did not find interoceptive awareness or symptoms of anxiety to be affected by microdosing psilocybin. While there were slight changes, the main effects seemed to be increased mood, which definitely doesn't worsen anxiety. So it wasn't proven that it technically helps anxiety based off of the experimentation that they did. However, I really just think that increased mood in a way does help anxiety. The main reason I wanted to cover this topic for my final project is that in relation to our class, I have the advantage of being close friends with someone that is currently undergoing microdosing for severe anxiety. I've watched her struggle on many occasions, and I've seen firsthand the severity of her seemingly uncurable anxiety, despite all the treatment methods she has tried in the last 3 years. For the sake of her privacy, let's call her Geraldine. Geraldine has been suffering from debilitating and severe anxiety since the fall/winter of 2019. After trying multiple different SSRIs and discovering that she was actually allergic to benzodiazepines, a drug used to relieve anxiety or help people sleep, she was still not finding any success. At this point, she decided to take a more natural approach. She'd heard about microdosing psilocybin, and with the support from her parents, she found a treatment program with a coach of sorts that guides her through the process. I asked her, "How did you find out about this kind of treatment for severe anxiety?" And she said, "After struggling with antidepressants and trying multiple with no success, I decided to take a more holistic route. I had heard about people microdosing for psilocybin for depression, and it was definitely something that I was always interested in." And then I asked her, what do you feel when you are microdosing? The first time I took my psilocybin and lion's mane, I felt a small buzz. I was slightly more giggly, and the colors were brighter. The main and most important thing when taking a dose is setting an intention for the day and what exactly you want to get out of your microdose. These intentions are simple questions such as, something new I learned or discovered about myself today, was, or what stands between me and making the biggest move in my life, or What gets to change the moment I remember I'm worthy, or even deeper, the thoughts that keep me up at night are, and that kind of thing. She also then said, with microdosing, I've realized it is genuinely all about learning about yourself and asking the hard questions that an SSRI would normally mask or hide. This can seem scary for most because intense feelings are not fun, but dealing with them now and early on to be able to live a life free all of that weight is more appealing to me than anything else. I wish more were given the opportunity and resources to try the same treatment that I've been fortunate enough to try. All right, I thought I would talk a little bit about dosage, and I mean, you probably know this, but 0.1 grams equals 100 milligrams. I had to look that up. Geraldine was instructed to begin taking 50 milligrams of a powdered form of psilocybin mixed with lion's mane, formerly called Hericium erinaceus, which is the fungi that is typically found growing on the sides of dead tree trunks. She did that for 4 weeks, and then after 4 weeks, she moved up to 100 milligrams for a 2-week period. All the while, she's having weekly visits with her coach. Toward the end of those 6 weeks, she and her coach decided that 150 milligrams was a happy spot for her. She then took a 14-day break from daily consumption of psilocybin, which was suggested and encouraged by her coach. Since then, she has now restarted the process with an 8-week duration. This time, she's no longer mixing it with lion's mane, and it's in capsule form now. So she's just taking straight psilocybin now, and she's no longer stacking. I thought I would also, for comparison, bring back the dosages that were used in the 2 studies. So in the first study, reported microdoses identified in observational research typically range from 5 to 20 micrograms of LSD and from 0.1 to 0.3 grams of dried psilocybin mushrooms. Microdoses are most commonly used several times a week with various patterns of alternating days. So that's pretty on par with what my friend was doing. From the second study, their dosage deal, they said that the doses contained 0.7 grams of dried psilocybin containing galandoid truffles, which corresponds to around 1/10 of a medium to high dose, which I thought was a really weird way of putting it, but got it. This analysis revealed an alkaloid concentration of approximately 2,129.2 micrograms per gram, which translates to approximately 1.5 milligrams per 0.7 grams of dried truffle dose administered by our participants. So that pretty much aligns as well, based off of potency. And then I continued my interview with her, kind of to talk a little bit more about the emotional side of this. So I asked her, how has this microdosing process helped your anxiety thus far? Her answer was, after 3 weeks on psilocybin, I felt an insane connection to myself. I felt as though my inner voice was speaking to me and I could finally hear what she needed and was begging for me after all of these years. Our bodies are beautiful, and it's amazing how much it can do for us if we just listen. Going about my day felt entirely different than it used to. When I would feel triggered or stressed, instead of immediately jumping to old habits, the voice in my head would question the old habit and give me a new, better solution. I have also had past memories that were hard for me to deal with and basically black come back more clear, so I've been able to break apart or analyze them better. I have had a good amount of energy and I feel a sense of calm within me. I took a 20-day break in between my 6-week protocol. It is recommended to try and take a break and give your brain a break to see how it feels to be without the psilocybin for a little while after the first treatment. I did notice a difference without them, and I did miss them, but life was very manageable without them, and I learned a lot while being off of them. And then I just asked her what were really the pros and cons. So first, I'll talk about the pros of microdosing for the purpose of relieving anxiety. She said, there have been many pros to taking the mushrooms. Not only have I gained a deeper understanding of myself, but I feel I've grown a new perspective on my life, and now I will be able to handle situations or hardships that come my way in the future. My nervous system has been stuck in a constant panic, fight or flight for the last 5 years, and I needed something to really help me dive deeper to understand what exactly has been causing all of this chaos inside of me. I found this part of the interview very interesting because it analyzes and draws evidence from a very emotional perspective. This experience altered her brain chemistry in a way which she was able to begin processing trauma from her childhood. This is something that is obviously much harder to accurately conclude, but I found it very interesting to think about it from this point of view. In an article by Joel Bornemann, he acknowledges the scarcity of information on the effects of microdosing as well, but just simply says that the general effect of psychedelic microdose has been described as a really good day. And that's right over here. Throughout all of the research I've done, it seems that this simple statement is truly the advantage to all of this. While it definitely doesn't work the same as other drugs like a benzodiazepine in conquering anxiety, it seems to help in other ways by making the anxiety just not feel so bad anymore. Another quote I found about the pros from the Joel Bornemann article, which talked a lot about microdosing and the effects of creativity, was something that they measured in that study. He said multiple studies attest to an improvement of creativity associated with microdosing. Qualitatively, Fadiman and Korb and Johnstad, as well as a recent content analysis of the subreddit microdosing on the online forum Reddit, and a detailed analysis of the distribution of qualitatively reported microdosing effects, all reported that feelings of improved creativity were a common feature in the accounts that they analyzed. And then I asked her about the cons of microdosing for the purpose of relieving anxiety. She said that some cons to this have been that my emotions are extremely heightened. This journey compared to my antidepressants has been way harder, but much more rewarding. My first few weeks, I was crying a lot. Keep in mind, this was a huge change for me because when I was on the antidepressants, I wasn't doing much crying or letting go at all. I didn't think I realized how much I was carrying and pushing deep down to deal with later. Then from that same Joel Bornemann article, I found them quote the cons to be Fossis, Wong, and others investigating self-reported comorbid drug use in college students found that also almost 69% of people who reported microdosing in the past year also reported at least one negative consequence of the practice. However, similar to the overdosing concerns reported by Johnstad, the most commonly cited negative consequence was the experience of hallucinations. While I'm not surprised that there would be consequences, as in the studies we've looked at previously, there was reports of symptoms such as sweaty hands, dizziness, nausea, and other minor symptoms like that. It's funny that the actual most commonly reported consequence was hallucinating, because that would just be caused by an issue with dosage, not necessarily the treatment itself. Anyways, my conclusion now. So based off information that I've learned throughout the research process, I can definitely see a benefit in treating anxiety by means of microdosing psilocybin. I think that there's a long way to go in terms of large-scale research and experimentation in order to fully grasp the effects on emotional response. The second contrasting study that we looked at concluded that there was no effect on symptoms of anxiety or emotional response, yet there were signs of lowered anxiety and increased mood. In my opinion, as a person that also suffers from anxiety but has not tried any kind of microdosing treatment like this, I can definitely say that increased mood alone sounds like a pretty good deal. Holistic medicine will always have to fight for acceptance as a legitimate method of treatment, but I think there's clearly enough evidence already to show that there is truth behind this method. And that's my presentation.